The building they held Eurovision in this year was rated to hang 100 tons from its roof. They hung 140. Not recklessly, not by accident. They did it with structural engineers, a re-rated load plan, and then 350 wireless load cells watching that roof in real time, all night, every night.
Backstage.
Welcome back to the anatomy of a show. This is where I break down the behind the scenes or the technicalities behind great shows like this one. I'm taking a detour from regular concerts or tours to a live broadcast show. 35 countries, one night, no second chances. And this happened in Vienna. And here's the thing that made me want to make this episode. The venue was never built for this capacity. And the head rigger actually said it outright that an older city-owned building never designed with a production of this scale in mind. Suspended ceilings, restricted rigging positions, ventilation fighting for space above the roof. Sound familiar? That's the same conversation we have with almost half the rooms that we work in. So this is a video about a budget that you may likely never have. It's about what they actually did when the venue said no to the rigging capacity that they needed. And every one of those moves has a version that you can run on your next gig. We're looking at 3 layers. Let's go. Now, the final production load was around 140 tons. So the gap between those two numbers is like the entire episode. They didn't shrink the show, they didn't gamble either. They brought in structural engineers, agreed on a new engineering limit, and then, this is the part that matters, they measured it continuously. 350 wireless load cells across 5 monitoring systems, watching the roof loading, the scenic structures, LED elements, and the moving lighting rig. And they weren't only watching the static weight. When you've got moving winches and performers flying, you're dealing with shock loading, which means lose power suddenly, brakes engage instantly, and that creates forces the static number never accounted for. And according to the chief rigger, it said that the monitoring let them prove in real time what was happening for both the engineers and the production. Notice the keyword here, not assume, prove. So how does that come home, or how can you apply that to your next gig? You certainly can't buy a 350 load cell. That's a budget you probably would never have. So the transferable thing here isn't the equipment, it's the sequence. Imagine the building says, no, you can't fly a rig here. You don't guess, and you also can't walk off automatically because, of course, maybe the venue is like the best bet. What you need to do is to get an engineer to tell you exactly what the numbers are in writing. And then you walk under that number and you keep checking it. Let's say your roof can only do 80 tons. That means you have to work, and you've gotten this in writing, you have to work under this 80 ton. Maximum load should be not more than 75 tons on that rig. Or if you have to do that, then you probably do ground support. That's the same move I described in the venue video I did a couple of weeks ago, where the ceiling built for a fan is not made for a truss. You have to calculate the load bearing capacity of the roof you're working in. The difference between Eurovision and a disaster is not the budget, it's discipline. Somebody got the number in writing. If Europe's biggest broadcast has to do that in a city-owned venue from another era, nobody working in a Lagos warehouse should actually skip it. Get that number, the load-bearing number, for the roof you're about to, suspend tons of equipment on. Next, every song at Eurovision runs for 3 minutes, and then between them, those little pre-filmed postcard videos play out to the TV audience. To a regular audience, that's just like a transition filler or a transition clip. But to the crew, it's exactly 42 seconds. That's the whole window to redress the stage, to rotate mic and in-ear and reset positions for a completely different country's performance with a different type of staging. And they engineered into that window rather than rushing into it. We're talking about the audio team running rotations, 6 handheld mics, 6 in-ear packs, 6 all-in body packs with headsets and IEM. So nobody's ever waiting on a single unit to come back and get reset. There is always a new set waiting already. There's also a detail that I love. Instead of tape marks on the floor, like we do on most shows, they built the mark into the LED floors itself. Nearly 2,500 individual marks were built into these floors, programmed across 196 different stage configurations, appearing automatically at the right moment, glowing through haze and low light. Let's bring that home. This is the cheapest lesson in this episode. On regional festivals, multi-artist Afrobeat shows, gospel shows, changeovers are where the shows go to die. You have 20 minutes of dead air with someone scrambling around for an XLR cable, crowd turns, and the schedule is gone. So the lesson here is just 2 moves, and both of them are free. You can incorporate this like right now. First one, never schedule a changeover without a planned cover. That could be an MC on a dedicated mic, a DJ transition set, a house track. The gist here is that the gap gets filled by plan, not by improvisation. Work that into your run of show. 2, pre-patched both sides. Let's imagine if you have 2 different artists with 2 different type of set. What you do here is ensure that every single line has been pre-patched, whether it's in use or not. Act A stage box on one side and Act B already plugged in and line checked on the other. So when Act A finishes, you just flip a scene or flip a mute group and you're ready for Act B. Remember, you do proper planning, proper line check. So all of these lines have been tested and done, pre-patched, pre-tested before the show. So nobody is running cable across a live stage. Eurovision didn't get 42 seconds because they are rich. They got it right because they decided in advance what happens in those 42 seconds. Now, let's look at the redundancy itself. And there's a nuance here that a lot of people get wrong. No one is saying you have to double your entire production equipment or production rig. That's not a risk anybody can take. Not even Eurovision could do that. On video, the first thing they did was that the system was built with 1-to-1 redundancy because that's one of their major fatal points, because this is a live broadcasting event and video is a critical point for them. So across all their critical systems, they had a 1-to-1 redundancy factored in for instant failover if anything had developed any fault. Underneath it, they had a fully redundant 100 gig network with dual core switches, connecting around 480 devices. On comms and RF, they had around 60 MediaNet frames redundantly connected, feeding the technical operations center out to the OB van or OB trucks. They had a main and backup OB facility, which these systems were feeding at the same time simultaneously, just to ensure that if one drops off, the other person can kick off and there will be no glitch or no dropout in the broadcasts. For viewers at home will not even see a static line ever. And my favorite example on wireless is they had 6 base stations, 4 running live audio and control, 1 scanning the RF spectrum 24 hours a day, but already linked to every antenna in the room, so it can step in immediately should there be any fault in any of the other 4 that are going live. And the 6th one is sitting there as a true spare. But here's the part that makes this real. The 2 monitor desks that they had, they were not redundant. That's 2 consoles, 2 operators running independently. And the team actually mentioned this plainly, right? That's not sloppiness and that's not a waste. That's a practical judgment. Because they didn't double everything. That will be an impossible budget at any scale, even at Eurovision's level. They looked at the entire system and worked out which failures end the broadcast and which failures are survivable. And they spent their redundancy there. So the question isn't what can I afford to duplicate? The question is what kills my show if it dies? And for most of us, that's a very short list, right? Most importantly, your digital console, your playback, and your primary signal path. So run the desk and your playback on a battery-backed UPS. Never straight off the venue or generator power coming in directly straight to your console. Because when the gen drops, you want to ensure that your console doesn't go off immediately. Even if the PA goes quiet, your console stays booted and your show file stays intact. It saves you the whole embarrassment of having to stand there for 4 minutes after the power comes back on to reboot your entire system or reboot your entire console. This is the same logic as a 100 gig redundant network. And here's what Eurovision actually teaches, which is not necessarily about money. They started in a building that was not meant for a production this big. They had 42 seconds between acts, and they couldn't afford to duplicate every single system in their production. So what did they do? They got the real numbers for the roof load. They decided in advance, and they spent their production where it will be the most fatal. That's not a budget, that is discipline. And it's available to you in a 300 capacity room, a church, a festival, or even tonight if you have a gig tonight. Big budgets buy convenience, but it's discipline that buys you reliability. The artist on that stage can take enormous creative risks because the structure under them, the entire Eurovision team, was genuinely sound. And that's the job. Great production disappears. And this is what it looks like from the inside when it does. That's this episode of The Anatomy of a Show. Tell me in the comments, what show, tour, or festival would you like us to dissect next? Hit the subscribe button if this was useful, and I'll see you on the next gig.